Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, and I am not solo this week. I am joined by my usual partner in crime, Scott Schulze. Scott and I had an interesting pre-show conversation. We're probably not going to be talking about that on air, at least not on this podcast. Maybe if we create a different podcast, we can talk about it. But Scott, how are you? We missed you last week, and it's my fault. I gave you late notice. I maybe wasn't going to do a show, and actually the last calendar week I've been a little under the weather, so I wasn't sure if I was going to do it. And but I did one last week, and now we're together again this week. I missed you. How are you, man?
Doing good. It was it's very different. Last week I was actually out of town, so I would not have made it anyway. We were.
No, there you go.
As I mentioned, my son loves trains, so we actually went to some dinky little podunk town to sit at this park and watch freight trains go by, because it's a great spot for watching. It's a very active, very busy set of train lines, and so if you love to watch, just big, long, noisy freight trains go by, it's a lot of fun. If you don't, I would not recommend. There's really nothing out there. I mean, you're driving a long way in the middle of nowhere for nothing else. So, So if we do a third podcast, we can do one on watching freight trains.
Yeah. So I thought about you recently because I started re-binge watching the show The Office. I don't know if you ever watched the show. Fantastic show, and it's still hilarious numerous times watching it through. But there's a specific episode where, if you know the characters, Scott, Toby, the dull HR rep, and Dwight, the eccentric salesman guy, they were spying on a guy they thought was maybe trying to take HR for a workers' comp ride, if you will. And they were talking about trains, and they were like going back and forth on the specifics of what kind of train. And it was just, I think they only heard the tooting of the actual engine of the train. I'm like, oh, where's Scott? He's got to be in the back seat of this car as these two guys are chatting about trains. And I'm sitting here going, I have no idea. But it was kind of an interesting thing. And they were all, oh, you're into trains? You're into trains? I didn't know that. It was kind of an interesting thing. I'm like, Scott would love this scene. Where is this guy?
Well, no, I have to look it up on YouTube, because we've gone through the whole series at least once or twice, and I cannot recall an episode where the two of them got along. So
yeah, well, it's an episode in like season 5 or 6 where Daryl is Daryl, the warehouse guy, is injured, and they're trying to scope him out at his house. And as they're sitting in front of his house, they're having a conversation. They hear a train. Anyway, the nerds of The Office will probably know what I'm talking about. If not, then I probably sound like a lunatic, and that's okay. But we're gonna do a question of the night, though, Scott. And this was based on, I guess, an article. Cincy Jungle put it up. CincyJungle.com put it up, and it was. I'm trying to think of who it was here. It was from fanjuicer.com, and our thanks to Patrick Judas on CincyJungle.com kind of promoting this. But it's talking about basically how NFL fans do not like the Bengals logo, and at this point in 2017, 2018, they now use that striped B as their primary logo on a lot of different things that they have. So I wanted to put it out to you and to our listeners. I did put a poll out on Twitter about your favorite Bengals logo. And what I had was the Leaping Tiger, which is kind of the entire tiger, if you remember that one. That was more early to mid-2000s. Again, kind of early to mid-2000s. And even it's kind of a secondary logo now, the tiger head, just the face itself. And then there's the striped B, or there's, either if you got a different one you want to put out there, or maybe you like just the old school 60s, 70s block lettering Bengals across the helmet. Scott, I'll ask you I'm going to tell you right now, the tiger head has a slight lead in terms of our Twitter poll, has a slight lead, 35%. Second place is the striped B at 29%. 24% has the Leaping Tiger, and 12% has either other or none. I mean, they got to have a logo. I don't know why I put none, but that's midweek blues for my. So you're just real quick, your thoughts on your favorite logo of the Bengals. I'm kind of curious. I mean, obviously you and I have followed this team for a long time. I mean, heck, maybe even the striped helmet is something that's maybe your favorite logo. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I've been following them since they've had the striped helmet. So I've seen clips of the Bengal on the side. I didn't actually watch them back then because I think they changed in '81. And even though I was alive, I was a little too young to really know anything about the NFL. But I do like the striped helmet. And honestly, as far as the helmet itself goes, I think as far as NFL helmets, the Bengal striped helmet has always been my favorite helmet in the NFL. I think a lot of the ones are kind of generic. And even going to college, I've seen watching a ton of college football and NFL football growing up. The Bengal helmet's always been one of my favorites because it's very unique to sports and it's something that actually is representative of, the mascot. And it's whoever came up with that. And I don't know if the Bengals were the first team to have it or a college, smaller college team they copied from it. But I really like, it's not I've always really liked the helmet. I hope they never go away from it and go to words or like a little symbol. I like that the whole helmet represents, that. So I think the helmet's really cool. As far as the logo itself, my personal favorite is the leaping Bengal or leaping tiger. I know there's ones where it has like the words behind him and the words below him or no. Personally, I like the no words, but either way, I just like the tiger, that attack aggressive kind of a pose. I'm not a big fan of the striped B at all. That's probably my least favorite. I'd probably, and that's obviously his opinion. I mean, everyone has their own opinion. Some people listening probably think would put theirs totally backward of mine. One of the reasons I don't like the B, and this might be kind of silly, is it's also the Browns, last name, Paul Brown, Mike Brown, Katie Blackburn. So it's also seems like an attempt to try to get their initial, B for, the Browns. Not football team Browns, but the family owns a team. So I'd prefer to have like an actual object, a shape of something, a tiger head, a tiger paw, a tiger stripes, something more than a letter. And to me, the letter just seems kind of lame. But I think a lot of people who grew up with the letter, it's been around for over a decade. So some of the people who are newer fans or maybe, are younger have only ever seen the letter. So that may be why they like it. Maybe I like the jumping, the leaping tiger because they had that when I started following them, when they were god awful. But for whatever, and the funny thing is they had some awful teams when they had that logo. But I've always liked that look. For whatever reason, it's a tiger. That's what they are. It's not a lame tiger. It's a cool. And I even like the tiger at the very beginning. It's the very cartoony kind of before they had the words on the side. If you ever seen a picture, there's like this kind of like running, almost like a Tony the Tiger kind of a tiger with a football, and he's doing almost like the like a run with claws or something, like he's doing the whole fullback kind of thing. Even that's kind of, I mean, if they went back to that, did like a throwback thing for the 50-year anniversary, that would have been kind of cool. Obviously, it's too late for that now because you don't really do much for a 51st year anniversary. But yeah, long story short, the striped helmet I think is awesome. Hope it never goes away. And anything showing the tiger, and even the one on Cincy Jungle, there's a really cool one. For those who are listening to this who do not regularly visit Cincy Jungle, this is a plug for that site, which we both write for. And there is a very famous image on that site. It's kind of an inside joke image. There's a picture that always comes up on Cincy Jungle that someone drew that looks like they, took like Microsoft Paint and tried to draw a tiger. And it's one of these hideous looking things that maybe a 5-year-old would draw, but it's just really classic. I'd even take that over the bee. So that's my take.
That one is hilarious, and I'm trying to pull it up. I did put in the live YouTube chat, I did put out like a link to, I think it's on Pinterest, of that. And Jason Von Stein in the YouTube chat agrees with you, Scott, about that old running tiger. He's got his helmet's flying off, and he's got the ball in his hand. And yeah, it totally looks like 1960s, 1970s, like comic strip type of like what you'd see in the funnies in the old school newspaper type of deal. And that is a classic one. I'm in agreement with you. I'm not a big fan of the bee. I mean, it has its moments where it's kind of cool and it looks pretty unique and different. To me, I like the leaping tiger and all that. To me, the face, that face of the tiger where it's real close up, that's my favorite. pretty unique, pretty different. And I'm also with you, Scott, on the helmets. I think the helmets are very unique. And to be quite honest, when I was a young kid, and my brother, who got me into the team when he was a young kid, one of the things that drew us in, being 6, 7, 8 years old at the time, were those crazy helmets. You know, the orange and the black, and kind of unique, and kind of, we just wanted to ask our listeners about that. So if you have thoughts about that and you're joining us live throughout this evening on Wednesday night, let us know in the YouTube chat. Let us know in the cincyjungle.com comment thread, or you can let us know on Twitter at Bengals OBI. Real quick, Scott, any changes you would make? Because right now, as the Bengals use those quote-unquote color rush uniforms, it's basically white and black unis, and which I think have their moments of looking pretty sleek. White and black unis with the orange and black helmet. Does that strike you as weird? Would you make changes there? I don't know. Any uniform or logo variation you would do on the quote unquote color rush, which with white is what, a lack of color, right?
Yeah, there's one change I would make, and I'm not the first person to say this, but it seems to be a very common theme. Anyone who's seen the color rush, it just looks kind of silly that the colors aren't all consistent. You have the black and white, and then you have the orange and black up on the head. I think the solid black and white would be, or I guess it wouldn't be solid if it's too, the black and white helmet to go with the black and white uniforms, I think would be really cool, because that way you've got like the whole entire, Siberian tiger look. So that'd be the one thing. I think the color rush, some of the color rush, look kind of silly on some of the teams, some not so much. I do like the Bengals one because I do think the black and white is kind of a cool look, and it is an actual tiger. I mean, there actually are tigers are black and white, so it still goes with the theme really well, and it's just like a classic, two very classic colors. And I just wish I'd take the orange off the helmet when they do the color.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, but here's the thing: Bengal tigers are not normally white tigers, right? I mean, aren't white tigers? And I'm not a zoologist or a biologist or anything like that, but I think that white tigers are a different species from a quote unquote Bengal tiger. So, but I do see where you're saying let's have the helmet at least match those uniforms. I mean, it kind of sticks out a little bit, but they got to have that spot of orange somewhere. I wouldn't mind even more, maybe you reverse it a little bit. Maybe the uniforms that are primarily black and you got the touch of white with the white helmet and the black stripes. I don't know. They're maybe they could get a little more creative, but I think for the most part, most of us are in agreement that the B is maybe. I did see Carlos Andre, and he did interact with us on Twitter as well. I did see him in the YouTube chat saying he likes the B, and I get it. I mean, I think that there's definitely a little bit of an attraction to that, and it's very different to other logos that the Bengals have held in the past. But kind of an interesting conversation and a question of the night for this episode. So let us, and if you're tuning into this episode, let us know, like I said, on YouTube, on Twitter at Bengals OBI, or the cincyjungle.com comment threads. Or you can let us know after the fact. If you're downloading this program, you can get this program and give us your comments on SoundCloud, YouTube, cincyjungle.com, iTunes, via email, theobinsider@gmail.com, and as I said, Twitter at Bengals OBI. So, Scott, let's get to some more kind of news and notes and or tidbits of information. I gave
just one.
Yeah, go. What?
Just one thing. I throw a very last thing about the color, and you're mentioning, how the Siberian tiger, which is more Russia, Siberia, is the black and white tiger. The Bengal tiger is from the Bengal region, the Bay of Bengal, or Bangladesh, which is the orange one. So, but even the Bengal tiger on the underside has the white and black. It's only like on that's the orange. So so I'm accurate, yeah. But that being said, and that's something too. They could make like the back side of the Bengals orange and the front side white. I don't know.
You could do that.
I'd like to see a consistent color. It just looks kind of silly to have. It just looks like the helmets are out of place. Like they left their helmets at the airport, and oh crap, let's grab these backup helmets. Or it just doesn't seem like it goes. And you'd think teams with billions of dollars could afford them.
Well, and if you remember what the Jacksonville Jaguar, not the past year or two now, but they kind of had helmets that faded into a different color. Their jerseys kind of faded into different colors. So maybe that's something the Bengals do. And if there's one thing we know about the Brown family and the Cincinnati Bengals, they are on the cutting edge. They are super creative. Should I put sarcasm on here? I don't know. They're not. They just kind of go with the flow and do their thing. Speaking of doing their thing, they're doing their things to organize team activities in the spring of 2018, and there are a lot of different news and notes and headlines. Last week, Scott, I talked a little bit about Carlos Dunlap deciding to sit out OTAs, and now Dre Kirkpatrick is joining him. I kind of want to get your thoughts on both of those guys because I didn't get your thoughts on Dunlap this week, and now another prominent, basically a starter who already has a pretty prominent contract, is sitting out OTAs. And I think there's an argument to be made in terms of being in Dunlap's corner to talk about, he doesn't want to get hurt in a meaningless practice in a contract year. And yeah, he's got some money coming his way. This doesn't necessarily mean he wants to not be in Cincinnati beyond this year. But we know that the OTAs, even though it stands for organized and it also stands for optional, I guess, we kind of know it means mandatory optional. And I kind of want to get your thoughts on both of these guys being entrenched starters, and especially Kirkpatrick now, because that's new news this week. And because the Bengals invested pretty heavily in defensive back this year, and William Jackson seems poised to take another starting spot, maybe even be the best cornerback on this roster. Your thoughts on both those guys skipping OTAs? Yeah,
as far as Dunlap, I don't really have a problem with it because he's not a guy that's been a bad character guy. He hasn't been a holdout guy. He hasn't been one of these guys that's, he's been a great player, a great team player, great teammate. Everything you read about him, he's been in the running for the man of the year kind of stuff. Like, he's just a very class person. He signed a contract, several years back before he kind of came into his own. They've had him for, 5-6 years at a very reasonable price compared to the market. So, you look at his perspective, he's a great player. I don't think he's, out to get anybody. He's just a great player. He's played well beyond what he's been paid over that period. And I think he knows that, hey, this is my shelf life. I want to be 30 next year. This is my chance to get my money. I don't want to do anything silly and injure myself. And like you said, it is optional. And I think he's making obviously him and his agent have gotten together and they said, okay, by missing this, workout, we are going to forfeit however much money, with the hope that by playing and waiting to play until preseason and the training camp and the regular season and skipping things before that to get to that point, I have a better chance of staying healthy and then therefore increasing my value for my next contract. And so I just look at it as a business decision on his part that they're trying to weigh how much money can we sacrifice in fines and lost bonuses versus what we think we can get at a next contract, trying to avoid injury. So, and I think he knows he's a starter. I think there's no question. I mean, it's not like we're going to say, okay, he skipped OTAs, he's now the backup. I mean, I don't see Marvin benching a starter. I don't see the Bengals doing that. He's a very proven player, a good player. Regardless of what happens, he is the starter. So with him, I have no objection. I mean, he's been a great class guy for the team, in every on and off the field. The Dre Kirkpatrick one. Okay, now that one just really confuses me because, like you said, they just threw a ton of money at him last year, gave him a big extension, kept him around. And as you mentioned, obviously William Jackson, had a great second season after being injured most of his first year and then not getting to play the final few weeks when the team activated Cedric Pierman off the IR return. So Jackson pretty much sat his whole first year. His second year, he was incredible. He obviously solidified his position as one of the two starters. Dre Kirkpatrick finally emerged, had a very solid year as kind of like their third cornerback. So the Kirkpatrick thing I don't really understand because, they're not going to pay this guy, so many $1 million over that many years to not start him. And the Bengals generally aren't a team that's going to cut a guy with that much money invested in him. So I don't know if he's just trying to avoid injury or what his story is, because even if he gets hurt, he's still getting paid. So the Kirkpatrick one, I don't really understand. I can't imagine he's holding out trying to get more money, because I think they kind of overpaid. If you look at how the backups have played, you look at how well William Jackson's played, they still have him for 3 more years. So I just without tripping over my words, because I just can't think of a good word to explain why Kirkpatrick would not be an OTAs, barring, something off the field, something internal that we just don't know about.
So, I'm kind of looking at a different number of items on Dre Kirkpatrick in terms of his salary. Essentially, with the new contract he signed a couple off seasons ago, he's getting paid $10.5 million per year on average, and that's also on average his really essentially his cap hit. This year, the next couple of years are more in the 11 to 11 plus $11+ million range. This year, he's kind of more 9-5 million, but overall, $10.5 million average per year as a cornerback. That's number 13 overall. That's the 13th highest paid cornerback overall in the NFL. And, you look at Josh Norman's the highest at $15 million a year, Tremaine Johnson, Xavier Rhodes, Patrick Peterson. Obviously, these are guys that do deserve to be paid more than Dre Kirkpatrick. Now, you look back at a couple of years, I think 2014 and 2015, Dre Kirkpatrick had some decent years. Last year was not a banner year for Dre Kirkpatrick. I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill here. He's being paid slightly more per year than Jimmy Smith, his AFC North counterpart in Baltimore. I tend to think Jimmy Smith, especially in recent years, is probably a better quarterback than Dre Kirkpatrick. I think Dre Kirkpatrick could be a very good number 2 cornerback in the NFL, and I think that's probably where he's going to be with the Bengals, because I think William Jackson, I think most of us can agree that based on what we saw last year, William Jackson is ready to step into that number 1 role. But I don't really, aside from, I don't want to get injured, and I don't want to, we saw the Steelers just on Wednesday. They lost their backup offensive tackle, pretty, relatively valuable guy, a tight end. I think I said last week the Chargers lost Hunter, their starting tight end, the guy who was replacing Antonio Gates, and another player, I think the Eagles linebacker lost. They both tore ACLs, done for the year. Obviously, you don't want your starters there in these meaningless practices in basically helmets and shorts. Yes, you want to learn new playbooks. Yes, you want to get, all of that, but you don't want to see them done for the year in meaningless practices. But Dunlap, I sort of understand. Kirkpatrick, I don't. Maybe he feels as if, he's got things set up and he's good to go, and he's got his starting spot, he's got his money, and that's that. I think he's got a lot of heat this year, and I don't want to say that 5th round picks Devontae Harris and Darius Phillips are guys that are going to be pushing for his starting job, but you've also got Darqueze Dennard in the final year of his deal. Again, William Jackson really pushing to be the number 1 corner on this team. I don't really see where the mindset is. My thought, Scott, when you mentioned, hey, maybe he's holding out for more money. If he is, he's crazy. Based on what he's being paid in terms of average salary per year, what he did last year, and the amount of corners that are on the Bengals roster right now, he's crazy if that's the thought. But I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, but it is notable that he's not there, right?
Yeah, although I thought I was on mute. Guess I'm not. Okay. One thing
you're not. We hear
is, and this was just an update pretty recently, that he's supposed to be at OTAs later this week, and he was out for a death in his family. So if that's the case, that could be the reason why. Because like we were talking about, there's no other reason why he would be out. I mean, he has a huge contract. He got a ton of money last year. The way the contract paid him, it paid him a ton last year. This year's I think down to $8 million, and then the next 3 years are 9s with much smaller cap hits, which means the Bengals could walk away if they wanted to. But if he's back, tomorrow or whatever, and like this report says he is, and okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that stuff, and again, we don't know that much right now, but if that's true, obviously that stuff takes precedence over a lot of things in life, your job, whatever. I get it, and I don't want to, I don't want to rake him over the coals if that's if that's indeed what he is missing OTAs for or practices for. Obviously, family and all that stuff comes first. So, Dre, if you're listening, and we know you are because this is such a popular podcast, we apologize if that's what it is. But it does make headlines. It was on CincyJungle.com. It's on Twitter. It's on all that stuff. I mean, it's known that he's not there. So, Nicholas Dunlap on social media, you would have seen that he has been kind of living it up in terms of vacations over the past week or so. Now, that doesn't mean he's not working out. There's some stuff showing that he's working out, but he's been on tropical vacations and all kinds of stuff. And, I guess he can afford to do that in more senses than one when I use the word afford. So, but, it's just, this is a use where you just want all hands on deck, especially what's happened the last couple of years. And these two guys who are supposed defensive leaders, again, we don't know what's going on with family matters and all that. That needs to obviously take priority. But if it's just kind of, hey, I don't really feel like showing up, I get that you want money. I get that you want, to preserve yourself for the season, obviously. But Andrew Whitworth, I don't remember him ever sitting out OTAs, at least not for an extended period of time. And he's a guy that was there in his early 30s, mid-30s when he was with the Bengals, still there. It kind of sets a tone a little bit. And interestingly, those are two positions that are very competitive this year. So we'll see what happens with that. But obviously, I think we know that Carlos Dunlap and Dre Kirkpatrick will be safe in terms of their starting position. But at least at a minimum, other players are getting a little bit of a look this spring as those guys are out of the lineup. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. That's Scott Schulze. We are here almost every week, at least when it really counts. We'll be here every week talking Bengals football. You can get this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, CincyJungle.com. You can also get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We hope you do that. And we appreciate all the feedback that you guys give us. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our iTunes channel. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and get all of our content. And be sure that you are getting immediate notifications as our new stuff comes out, our new podcasts come out, because we want to get you the content as it comes out. We appreciate all the feedback. I don't want to talk too long about this young man, but Bobby Hart is a guy who's a backup offensive lineman, and he recently came out with a comment, and you can see this article on CincyJungle.com, that he hopes to play 16 games for the Bengals and start 16 games for the Bengals. We talked a little bit last week when you were gone, Scott, about the offensive lines, certain switches, the coaching changes, all of that. Bobby Hart is listed as a guard tackle on the Bengals roster as it currently is. I mean, is he really far-fetched in thinking that he could be on this team, the final 53-man roster, and potentially start or play in some capacity for the Bengals, whether it's maybe even a jumbo tackle type of thing or what have you? Or have we seen enough from this guy and, when he was with the Giants, and say, you know what, thanks, but no thanks?
I'd say on one hand, if you look at what he did with the Giants were more than happy to get rid of him. They were Yeah, Pro Football Focus hated him. I think they rated him as one of the lowest offensive tackles last year. The Giants obviously were not big fans of him. They let him go. A lot of the players were complaining, or at least some were, that he was kind of maybe not cancer, but definitely not trying, kind of an issue on the team. So, look at how, and even Giants fans are like, yeah, this guy was just not very good last year. So all the indications are looking at how he played last year. He just was not a very good, very productive NFL player by NFL standards, whatever measure you want to look at, whether it be your own team, your coaches, outsiders, whoever it was looking at him, he just did not play well. That being said, there's two things going for him where he actually could, someone who struggled that much could not only make the Bengals roster, but get playing time. The first one is we have a new offensive line coach who has had some very good offensive lines in Dallas. Now, that being said, most of those guys were first-round picks. They were high picks. So it's not like he's turning a bunch of undrafted free agents into studs. Although Doug Free was not a first-round pick, he did fairly well. But, for the most part, Tyron Smith, all these guys were, Travis Frederick were very high picks who were very good. So you have an offensive line coach who, in theory, could get this guy turned around. Of course, he could also do that with the other guys on the roster who were here before Hart came here. The second thing going for him is the other guys on the roster. And I think that's the biggest thing that, goes for Hart. And of all the places to land, for someone like Bobby Hart, this would be an absolutely wonderful spot, because the way he, in his 2 years as a starter, he struggled at right tackle 2 years ago, struggled at left tackle last year. I mean, horribly struggled. Jake Fisher did not look a whole lot better when he got in. Granted, he did have a health issue that has, supposedly has been corrected, but you don't know if there's going to be any secondary effects from that. Maybe his play gets better, maybe it gets worse. You just don't know. And then you have Kent Perkins as the other option. That's a guy who has played very little. He was an undrafted free agent. He looked good in bits and flashes in preseason, but of course that's preseason, against guys who are, third, fourth stringers on the other team. So looking at his competition, there's not like, it's not like he's going up against Willie Anderson or someone at right tackle who's just an entrenched stud, or even this young promising guy. And they didn't even draft a guy. They really didn't draft anyone except for that very, very, very last round. The kid out of Ole Miss who can, who's probably going to be a rotational backup.
Rod Taylor,
yeah, who can play guard and tackle in some different spots. So that's kind of probably the biggest thing going for Hart that really makes us not so crazy. What he's saying is that it's not like you look at this roster and say, man, this guy has no chance because of A, B, and C. You look at this roster and it's just like, man, you just hope one of these guys turns out to be, at least league average NFL starter.
Yeah, here's the thing. You look at Bobby Hart when he joined the Giants back in 2015, okay? He's played in 33 total games and started 21. All of those were at right tackle. Now, when you look at, obviously he struggled at right tackle for the Giants, and the Giants really, if you really want to pinpoint some of their struggles and Eli Manning's struggles, a lot of it rests on the offensive line play over the past couple of seasons. But this is what may be a little bit of an ingenious thing for the Bengals, and they're bringing in a Bobby Hart, and they're talking about, offensive guard, offensive tackle. Same thing with Cedric Ogbuehi. Backup tackle is going to get reps at guard. Guys that could be emergency guys at tackle, but may, because of their shortcomings, may be better fits inside at guard. And you see all these when the draft comes around, right? All of these guys who were great tackles in college, and they talk about short arms, they talk about athletic limitations, they talk about weight issues, whatever. And they're saying, well, this guy could be a better fit inside. You look at this is probably the most prime example is Robert Gallery, if you remember him. He was drafted in the mid-2000s, I think he was number 2 overall or something by the Raiders, a guy who was an offensive tackle and struggled mightily as an offensive tackle, both on the left side and I think the right side for the Oakland Raiders, soon to be Las Vegas Raiders. But all of a sudden, the Raiders kicked him inside at guard. He was then brought over as a guard to the Seahawks with Tom Cable, who was the former, and he had a decent career, actually a pretty above average career at guard. Unfortunately, it was towards the end of his career with injuries and all that kind of stuff. It didn't really last that long, but there are guys who look the part of tackle in the NFL and show it in college and all of that, but for some reason they can't keep up with the athleticism and the schemes and all of that NFL defenses put out there, and they are just a better fit on the inside. So I personally would not, because again, I think we've talked about this on the past couple of episodes, Scott. Center is going to be Billy Price. Left guard is going to be Clint Bowling. Left, Cordy Glenn. That right tackle, we think, is probably going to be Jake Fisher. We don't know. A couple of guys are vying for it, including Abuehi, maybe Bobby Hart. And then that right guard position is wide open. I think more natural fits in terms of that true position. Christian Westerman, Trey Hopkins, all of those guys fit the mold. But if they've got a guy who kind of has a fringe athleticism at tackle, but has the size of a guard and can play guard, I don't know. Maybe Hart's that guy.
Well, I think my complaint or problem with him playing, but we can only have so many right guards, with Alex Redmond and Trey Hopkins and Christian Westerman, and then if Abuehi and Bobby Hart become right guards, we're going to have this problem. We have like 5 right guards and no right tackles. And I totally agree that there are obviously cases where guys, you kind of start on the outside and you kind of work your way in. Like, well, this guy wasn't good enough to be a tackle. Let's slide him inside, kind of like in baseball. And their draft's coming up this week. The idea is you go for the center fielders and the shortstops. And if they, at some point, they prove they're not good enough with their range, their arm, or whatever, you slide them to second base. You slide them to third base. You put them in left field. But you kind of start with those. So, same with the offense. You start left tackle or right tackle. Okay, he can't cut it. Let's slide him into guard. And the problem is, man, we have so many guys who are sliding into this right guard spot. You just have to hope that, if it turns out we have 2 right guards, hopefully one of them can play that tackle position. Because the thing I would hate to see is that, we end up with, we come out of camp and, man, we have 5 guys who would be great NFL or solid NFL starting right guards, but not a single person that can play tackle. So I'm just hoping that somewhere along there they can find one of those guys, whoever it is, can play that right tackle. Because if everyone slides into guard with the the 3 they have there, unless they, I don't know if this is crazy, but maybe if someone like Hart and Abuehi have to slide into guard, maybe a Redmond or a Westerman or Hopkins slides, out the tackle, which obviously is the more difficult transition to make. And, nothing, really shows that they could do that. But I know Pollock's talked about, everything's starting fresh, and everything's up for grabs. So maybe he sees something in one of these guys that makes him think, hey, this guy could be a serviceable tackle, and one of these tackles is better fit for that guard position. I just hope we don't end up with a situation where we just have a ton of guards and no tackles.
Yeah, no true tackles. I do want to say this. I do not discount the Bengals from potentially making I don't want to say it necessarily a player trade, but post June 1st cuts, which are right around the corner, cuts during training camp. There could be tackles and stuff that are available there. We've seen them make late offseason additions like Eric Winston and stuff who have come in. Granted, Eric Winston was at the very tail end of his career, but he did contribute on some level. Maybe the Bengals again, at least that right side with bubblegum and tape and glue and all that kind of stuff. Maybe a veteran journeyman. Who knows? It could be Hart, veteran journeyman. But I do not discount the Bengals perhaps making one of those signature moves, especially ones that do not count against the compensatory draft formula, because that's obviously something that they pride themselves on keeping. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's Scott Schulze. You get the program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, at cincyjungle.com. subscribe to all of those channels, and you can get the program as well on cincyjungle.com, as well as all of the other platforms I mentioned. And you can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com, and on Twitter @BengalsOBI. Thanks so much for your questions and all of that. We're going to get to that in just a second. Just real quick thoughts here, Scott, on Andrew Brown, the rookie defensive tackle. For those who don't know, Andrew Brown's a really interesting guy, and he recently sat down with Rebecca Toback at cincyjungle.com for an exclusive interview. I don't want to go through all of it, but go to jungle.com to kind of get some of the nuances of that interview. Obviously, he's going to be a guy that is going to be not only vying for a roster spot, but a guy who's going to be vying for playing time. And I want to get your thoughts on that as well. But for those who don't know, Brown's kind of an interesting guy. He's very passionate about music. He's done a couple of different things. And again, in this post on cincyjungle.com, you can get some of his music on there. The other thing is his mother was 38 years old when he passed away, battling lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and breast cancer. Unfortunately, he was 10 years old when his mother passed away, again at 38. And he is using that as a reason, quote unquote, reason why I do this. So pretty again, sad background, but pretty cool that he is honoring his mother's memory and using the NFL as that platform. So pretty cool. And just a really neat story. And unfortunately, some of this stuff kind of gets overlooked. Again, he was a 5th-round pick, so some of this stuff doesn't get talked about as much as the 1st-round picks, the 2nd-round picks. So check that out. I guess your thoughts, Scott, on Andrew Brown. The Bengals drafted Ryan Glasgow, a guy that they like as a defensive tackle. They have Geno Atkins. They have Andrew Billings. I think Andrew Brown makes it and could be a very, very decent contributor to this team as a rotational guy. They flirted with Deshaun Williams. They flirted with, all kinds, Marcus Hardison, all these guys, and they didn't work out. I think this guy might be a diamond in the rough in the 5th round and a guy that they could use this year. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a possibility. And the one thing you notice the most when you go back and watch his film when he was playing in college, is that they tended to play him all over the place. He didn't really seem to have a home. I mean, they played him inside some, they played him outside, they played him on the left side, the right side. It wasn't like you're a 3 technique and that's what you're going to be, which seems to be the spot that he's probably the best fit for, kind of like a Geno Atkins backup kind of a guy. He's not your nose tackle. He's not your, speed edge rushing defensive end type. He's more of your guy that seems to be that penetrator from the inside. And it's just very interesting to see that for whatever reason, the team he played for in college kept moving him all over the place, and either they were trying to maximize him or just couldn't figure out where to put this guy. And so I think that may have caused him to drop a little bit in the draft, because when teams were trying to evaluate him, there just wasn't enough tape to see him in any one spot to see what he could do or couldn't do. So I have to assume the Bengals are going to use him at that Geno Atkins spot. And as you mentioned, Anthony, Ryan Glasgow is kind of another guy who is in a similar role. And then obviously the Baker, who they just signed from Tampa Bay, is probably also in that role. He's not I assume they'll line him up next to Atkins, even though he's not like the big-bodied, Andrew Billings, Pat Sims kind of a guy. It's like that 330 build. And it kind of makes you wonder, well, maybe is that something Tara Austin would go away from, having that big, that D'Amato Pecco, like we're just going to have this big guy that clogs the middle and then this fast, this very active guy next to him. Maybe they want to have 2 guys that can disrupt and not have that one big body just kind of sitting there. And if that's the case, it's very likely they could have 2 of those guys side by side, which is kind of, I think, more what Baker is supposed to be. He's more of a penetrator than a guy who's just kind of big. Like when they, got Sam Adams, a few years back, it's just, okay, you just kind of stand here and absorb half this line because you're 5 feet wide. So there's also a chance that depending on what Tara Austin wants to do, that they might look at trying to get him on the field with some of these other guys. And it might sound crazy, but maybe they're looking at doing something with a couple 3 technique guys at the same time, or shift, kind of moving the pieces of the line all around, because they did lose Chris Smith, who is another guy who is very good as a pass rusher on the inside. So yeah, I think the roles are kind of wide open, and until we see them in preseason, it's hard to gauge exactly how they see them. I mean, for all we know, they might see Lawson as more of a drop back linebacker since they haven't linebacker, or maybe they're like, no, that's ridiculous. He needs to be on the line of scrimmage and be in it. So I think there's a lot of positions up in the air as far as how they're going to use. So until we see otherwise, I think this guy does have a good chance to at least fight for a spot.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The Bengals had an undrafted free agent a couple of years ago named David Dean, who also came from Virginia, kind of a similar mold where, in that 6'1"-ish, 6'3"-ish type of range in terms of height, 290-ish in terms of weight, and a guy who could penetrate, a guy who could get in the backfield. David Dean, obviously, I think a lot of people think was, no offense, David, but less talented than Andrew Brown, less athletically gifted, and Andrew Brown had quite a bit of a college resume. But hold there, and obviously the Bengals are looking for guys that can get in the backfield. You mentioned Chris Smith. I think Sam Hubbard is going to be filling in that role. But, I think Carl Lawson's going to be roaming around, Carlos Dunlap and Michael Johnson, who, like it or not, is going to be a guy who probably is going to stick around and found a niche last year, rushing from the inside. And then, I think the Bengals have – it's always good to have options when it comes to rushing the passer. And I think the Bengals, especially with guys like Joe Flacco, Ben Roethlisberger, potentially even Baker Mayfield and or Tyrod Taylor, a mobile guy, you got to get those guys down before they make plays, whether it's with their legs or their arm or, respective quarterback. You got to get those guys down. You got to pressure them. You got to hit them. And I think the Bengals know that. And I think a guy like Andrew Brown could do that. I don't know if his upside is bigger than Ryan Glasgow. To me, Ryan Glasgow might be just more of a guy who can, stop the run a bit and do some things. Now, it is interesting that the Bengals aren't getting – they do have their big guy, their 330-pound guy in Andrew Billings, essentially. But they have other guys who are in that 300-pound range, not the big – they have Josh Tupou as well, but who knows if he's going to stick on the roster based on an offseason arrest and him bouncing on and off their team last year. Who knows? And he's a mammoth. He's like 340, 350. But I think the Bengals are going to get more of those athletic guys that can get in the backfield one way or the other, use leverage, aren't necessarily the gigantic space eaters that a Pat Sims or an Andrew Billings were, and they're going to mix things up, and that's okay. I think, Terrell Austin's going to do some things to create more big plays, and we'll see what happens there. Hopefully positive results are netted. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Again, I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's Scott Schulze. Thanks so much for all of your support. We're going to get to a couple of listeners here. We did get to a little bit of a late start tonight. I apologize, but we did get a couple of interesting listener questions, and we'll get to those. You can get this program downloaded on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and CincyJungle.com. You can get in touch with us, as always, on Twitter at BengalsOBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Or you can also, get in touch with us in the comments and all of that during our podcast. Again, email, YouTube, all that stuff. We have a live YouTube chat that goes on throughout the show. So check that out. I hope you enjoy this program, and we love having you. Join us live every show. Normally, we're basically here every week, but off season, we may take a week off here or there. But for the most part, we're here every Wednesday night. So check us out. We hope you enjoy the program. Let's get to a couple of listener questions. And Scott, this is both a listener question and a topic that is of hot debate in recent weeks. I don't want to make this entire program about this topic, and I don't want to make this show political, but I was going to get to it last week in terms of the kneeling issue, quote unquote. The NFL kind of, whatever you want to say, the NFL putting the hammer down on its players, the NFL succumbing to the White House, the NFL succumbing to financial pressure, viewership about the kneeling during the national anthem. Again, I don't want to make this overly political, but this is a major, major thing in the NFL landscape. I've been asked about it off air. I've been asked about it on air. I've been asked about it from friends and all of that. Your thoughts on the NFL's new rules on kneeling and the national anthem and all of that? Did they get it right? Do they have any idea what they're doing? Or are they just kind of throwing up stuff against the wall and see what sticks?
It's really hard to say. I mean, this issue goes back, it seems to have been something where the NFL really hasn't been sure how to handle it. And I think part of the problem is because you do have the union. And so there's certain things you can only go so far, and you have to have all the teams buy in that, yes, we do support this rule or we don't. And then it also has to be something that is part of the collective bargaining agreement that doesn't violate, what the union signed and the team signed. And so so you can tell they're trying to make a compromise where they're not trying to step on anyone's toes. And I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing is, the protest, right or wrong. It seems that obviously when Colin Kaepernick started it, and then his teammates and then some other people joined along, initially it was supposed to be this, he perceived that there was a race inequality issue as far as, how police officers treated minorities in this country. But for a litany of reasons, it kind of grew into a much bigger issue as far as, disrespect the flag, soldiers and so forth. This is an offensive issue. Is it not an offensive issue? Is it a Second or First Amendment issue? And somewhere lost in there is this whole reason that he was, doing this protest. The whole point of that seems to have been totally over, glossed over, is now the focus tends to be on this other thing, which is, can they do this? Can they not do it? Is it right to do it? Is it offensive? So on and so forth. Ultimately, some people are going to find it very offensive, for various reasons. Like, Trump has tweeted, his reasons, and he's not alone. I mean, viewership has gone down quite a bit. I think anyone who watches the NFL knows people who have stopped watching it for this reason, because they did find it offensive. Other people don't find it offensive. They're like, yeah, whatever, really don't care. I think the NFL clearly does not want to lose the people who were offended. They don't want to lose revenue. So they're going to do whatever they can to try to bring those people back. And I think this is probably the whole point of the NFL is to make money. This is an attempt. Clearly, they need to get viewership back, get it to increase. You don't do that by driving people away. So if you don't have the protests, or you don't show them because they're protesting, and basically out of sight, out of mind, you can kind of get around it. You can let the players do what they want to do. If they want to protest, not protest, you kind of let them do their thing. The viewers aren't upset because the cameras aren't focusing on these players kneeling because they're not out there. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really solve, it doesn't really get to the issue, which I think ultimately, I don't think it was supposed to be about kneeling or not kneeling. It was supposed to be about, the police, the minorities, and so forth. And of course, that's the thing that's kind of forgotten, because the focus is kind of gone from what the whole point was to the kneeling or not kneeling. So it'll be interesting to see, once we get a month into the season, we'll kind of see if, players find another way to protest, if it just kind of boils over. And of course, every time Donald Trump says something, that'll make things worse, because, the country is clearly divided. Half the people, roughly voted for him, half didn't. So there's going to be a number of players who don't like him, who didn't vote for him, who are going to do whatever they can to, stir more things up, find a way to do that. So I assume, like most issues, eventually this will blow over. Currently, it's obviously not. And, these kind of half-hearted measures to try to fix things, I don't think are going to be sufficient. I think when the next CBA comes up, or before then, the players and the teams just have to get together and say, okay, let's just all sit down. We're going to lock, kind of like what the Catholics, when they elect a pope, all the carts lock themselves in the Sistine Chapel. They lock the door from the outside, and they're like, you guys do not come out until you elect the Pope. They need to do that with the NFL and the Players Union. Just lock them all in somewhere. Find a room, lock them in, and say, you guys aren't coming out until everyone agrees this is what we're going to do, and everyone's cool with it. We're not going to pick something where these people like it and these people don't, because you're just going to get more of the same, where some people are going to be happy and some are. And of course, for the media, it gives, they're going to keep covering it until it dies down because it sells, and if it bleeds, it leads. And so I don't know if I really answered the question. I think I just rambled.
No, it's good. I want your point of view, and I'm not sitting here saying, hey, be super PC, but at the same time, this isn't a political podcast. It's a Bengals podcast, but it does this rule change and everything affects the Bengals, and this entire thing affects the Bengals. We talked a couple of months ago before the draft, when the Bengals brought in Eric Reed as a possible, guy that they could use as a safety. He's a talented player, and he has yet to find a job. And the Bengals straight up asked him about, and Mike Brown asked him about his kneeling, and he was one of those guys on the forefront. So obviously this is not only an NFL thing, but it's a Bengals thing. And a couple of players, I think it was George Loka and maybe a couple of others, have spoken up about their thoughts about the kneeling. I don't want to go into a whole bunch of things. I don't mean to be a resident fence rider. I see arguments on both sides. I really, really do. But I kind of go back to, this is the National Football League, America. You're playing an American sport, and I don't know. I kind of just am like, maybe show that bit of respect, and you can do other things to promote, I don't want to say an agenda, but promote something that you are passionate about, whether it's police issues or what have you. I have relatives who are police officers. I've been for those who know me and know this show, I've also had a relative that has been involved in gun violence. So I'm kind of on both sides of the fence there. So, I see a lot of ends of the spectrum here, and there's a lot to dissect. I don't want to get into the whole thing, but it is very interesting that the NFL essentially has kind of, I don't want to say bowed, but kind of went with the White House, if you will, about certain things with the national anthem. And, I don't know how that's going to be received overall. This has been with Trump's presidency, whether you're with him or against him or indifferent. I don't know what to believe. You hear things that the NFL is not doing well, and their ratings are down, their money's down, the owners are feeling pressure, and that's why they did this, because they're feeling financial pressure. But then you also see other reports that ratings are up, and this isn't accurate. So I don't know who to believe about this, and I'm gonna go literally with one of our great listeners, and in Michael Myers, and what he wrote in our YouTube chat. He wrote, "This is America. If you want to kneel, fine. But if someone doesn't agree and decides not to sign you, then that's their choice, just like it was their choice to kneel. I served for 21 years, and yes, it upsets me. But again, the best thing about this country is the right to kneel you want." First of all, Michael, thank you for your service. As I didn't know we didn't know that you served in the American military. So thank you so much for your service. And that's kind of where I think, to be honest with you, I know there's people that are very passionate, that are anti police and all of that. And I can understand with some of the extremism and the videos and stuff that has been out there. And I can understand the other side. I think that's where a lot of people are. You have the right to choose whether or not you want to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. You have the right to choose to do what you want, but this is also America, and there are a lot of people who have died and or served for this country, and they do see that as a bit of a sign of disrespect. I think there's both sides to the coin. I don't know if you remember, Scott, there was a thing 5-10 years ago where certain people were not saying the word God in the Pledge of Allegiance in classrooms and business settings or what have you, and that caused a stir. And I kind of think that this is more of another offshoot of that a little bit, where people are just kind of like, well, you have the right, but not, just so you know, just because you have that right, not everybody's going to agree with you either way, right?
Yeah, I always have to make sure my mute is on or off. But yeah, and I think that's the thing too, that I think if you go back 2-3 years before any of this even started, if you asked your average fan what they were doing when the national anthem played, I mean, usually they didn't even see it on TV. I mean, because you're walking around, you're in the bathroom, you're in the kitchen. So most people would not have noticed it, because when they show it, it's not like, how many fans at home took off their hat, stood up in front of the TV during the anthem. I might be some, I assume it was very, very few. And even in the stadium.
Well, I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, in the stadium, I do. If I'm in the stadium, I do. And I do,
but at home.
No. To be honest, I mean, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
And, in the stadium, the people who are in the seats do. But a lot of people are in the bathroom. They're getting, beer. They're getting a hot dog. Some of them might pause for a moment, but some still keep doing their business as the vendors are still selling them food. And, if no one had ever said, hey, this guy's kneeling, most people probably would have never noticed, because you see people kind of moving around all the time, and there's people going in and out of the tunnel, and people tying their shoes, grab, the ball boys are getting balls, and they're, it's kind of like, if you go to church, some people, there's certain parts where people are generally more reverent, but you still have people doing things. They're still doing their lives. And so, yeah, I don't think you would have, anyone would have ever really noticed one way or the other. And kind of like with the pledge too, it's, I mean, people are going to, we have hundreds of millions of people in this country. And, I don't think they all have voted for one candidate ever, because they have very different views. Some people think the country's too far left and too far right. And same with football, some people are going to say, well, I don't want any politics in my football. Just give me football. I'm paying this money not to get all this stuff. I don't want the CNN or Fox or whatever. I just want football. And they're like, well, no, they have a right. You should let them. And you see that it's hard to get right. Cause even things like, the Tim Tebow thing, where like on the eye black, he put like, 1 Timothy 3:15 or whatever he had on there, Philippians and people do that too, when they do, their touchdown dance or kneel or, whatever, they do the little, sign the cross before they bat. Some of the players do. And here's different, things like you see, either it's religious or political or, spiritual or something that people are doing that, you can avoid if you want to, and obviously not everyone's compelled to join in. I mean, obviously, if Tim Tebow scored a touchdown and someone points to heaven, you don't have to point to heaven with them. You can just kind of sit there and clap or do nothing. But yeah, no, that's one of the things I think is very cool about this country is you look at somewhere like North Korea or China when they have these big military parades and they bring in all the missile launchers and all the tanks and all the soldiers are kind of marching through, that you are expected to behave a certain way. You have to stand, you have to salute, everyone in the audience has to come dress a certain way, act a certain way. You don't get to be an individual. You don't get to be who you are. That's kind of one of the cool things about the NFL. You can come, you can dress up like a moron, you can drink a bunch of beer and yell, you can just sit there on your hands and you can politely clap. You can do it. There's a lot of variety. There's a lot of options and a lot of freedom to do, kind of your thing. And that's, one of the cool things about this country is that you are allowed to, kind of govern yourself to a degree and decide how you want to behave and do what you want to do. And so some guys may want to kneel. And one that, not to go off on a tangent, but one of the other things is that, kneeling actually is a sign of reverence. I don't think he was kneeling as a sign of reverence, but in some cultures and even in this country, kneeling is something you do instead of standing. I mean, some people, here comes a judge, everyone stands. You go to church, some people kneel. They kneel before like a crucifix or before they pray. It's because it's a reverent thing. You see a knight when he gets knighted, he kneels before the king and he drops a sword on him. It's he's not protesting the king, he's kneeling before him. So there's many different ways. Again, I think I'm rambling, so I will turn it back over to you.
No, and it's good because that's what this topic elicits. It elicits conversations, and it elicits a lot of different things. I don't want to go too much further into it. We've got one more quick question, and then we'll get out of here. But I will say this, both family and friends on both sides of the fence, like I said earlier. I have cousins who were passionate about football, and when I've seen them recently, I was like, oh, yeah, we've been watching. They're like, well, how's everybody doing? I don't know. I kind of boycotted the NFL because of the kneeling thing. Okay. And then I have family members who are also police officers, but I also have friends and family members who are on the opposite side saying, well, I totally get what they're doing. I totally understand what they're doing, and I totally support what they're doing in terms of a quote unquote protest or whatever you want to call it. So, I have conversations on both sides of that fence. I will say this. I think that, if I were to be a professional athlete and everything, I would stand for, that's just me. I would stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem and do that. Do I agree with everything that's going on with this country and its political landscape and its social landscape? Absolutely not. This isn't necessarily the platform to talk about that, but there are many issues across this country, and I still think that it is the greatest country. No offense to those of you who are across the pond and in other countries that listen to us. I'm sorry. I still love the USA. But I think I live in the greatest country in the world. That doesn't mean that it's not without severe problems. So that's my thing. And my concern is with this, where's the line? And with many other issues, where's the line? And where does that line stop? Right? I mean, in the Olympics, there are guys, when men or women win medals, they're out there and they're representing their country. And where does the line stop? And that's my concern. And whether it stops or where it begins or whatever you want to say about it, that's my concern. Is, a year from now, what are we going to be talking about in terms of political landscape or social landscape or all of that? And it's not just about football. I just worry about what we're going to be talking about. And I think so many people are so passionate on one side or the other in terms of politics and social issues and all that. And that's okay. You should be passionate about your life, lives of others, and all of that. Totally. But there's that. And then there's also the faction of people that get, I hate to say it like this, but get rather offended about a lot of different things. And then other policies and other things are brought forth. So I just worry about this becoming a thing where, well, yeah, you can demonstrate how you want during the national anthem, but where are we going from here? And then what's next? And then what's next? And then what's next? And is this not, I don't know. I think there's, maybe I'm totally leapfrogging everything, but I wonder where all of this is heading. And I wonder if it's heading towards a positive direction or if it's heading towards more divisiveness, which I don't want. And I think most people would agree that they do not want more divisiveness, whether it's about this topic or other topics. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm going to take a deep breath and let that one percolate with everybody. And hopefully we didn't offend you, but hopefully we got you talking, we got you thinking about a number of different issues, not only in the political landscape, but in the NFL. This isn't a political podcast. It's a Bengals podcast. And we hope you bore through that question. We've got one more quick one before we get out of here. I hope my co-host will stick with me on this one. Scott, we were asked about Richie Incognito and the Bengals. Richie, let's go from one controversy, and let's just keep going. Obviously we all know about his bullying thing in Miami, and then he kind of rejuvenated his career and was a Pro Bowl player in Buffalo. Randomly kind of retired this year. Yeah, he's up there in age, but was still playing at a high level, decided to retire. And now there's some talk about him coming back. A lot of people are saying, hey, should he come back to the Bengals, maybe play right guard for them? He played right guard primarily in the early part of his career, mostly left guard at the end of his career. Good move, smart move. I don't know, man.
I mean, there's obviously two ways to look at it. One is, Richie Incognito, the person, and there was the whole thing with Jonathan Martin, and a lot of people speculate, well, was he really over the line, or was Martin just really soft? Because there were some other issues with Martin. I think he had tweeted something about, being suicidal or something. They were just, so that whole thing has some issues. And the thing without being in the locker room with him, it's hard to know, okay, is this guy just a basket case kind of crazy guy? Or is he just a regular guy and Martin just took it way? And then you have obviously the football perspective of it. And the football perspective, he could, as you mentioned, he is a little older. He could be an upgrade for possibly a year or so. The reason I would be against it without knowing what he's actually like off the field or in the locker room, just, I think many people speculate because of different things that have happened, but it's hard to know. When you're on the outside looking at it, it's so hard to be able to accurately speculate those kind of things. Is this guy crazy? Is this guy wonderful? Is he whatever? But the thing we can see is you look at the football field and what we see there, and kind of hit on this earlier, is the Bengals seem to have a potential glut of right guards. And I'm not sure the best situation for this team is to add one more in the mix, because with Westerman, Redmond, Hopkins, last year at right guard, Away possibly sliding in. Bobby Hart, we talked about sliding in. Gardner, the guy they drafted in the 7th round this year, possibly being a backup. You all of a sudden have just so many. You've got like almost a ton worth of right guards all trying to squeeze into that one spot, and then in that mix, does someone like Cognito? And now if Cognito was like an all-pro stud, like, yeah, this guy's, of course you do. You having a glut of solid mediocre guys shouldn't prevent you from grabbing an elite player. But if he's not that great step up from what they have, then I'm just not sure how it works with all those guys they have, unless he can play right tackle, which he probably, is not a right tackle. So I'd be inclined to be against it, just because that's just a ton of guys to throw at one spot.
So here's the thing, Scott. 4-time Pro Bowler. He entered the league in 2005. Okay, with the Rams, he played there for 5 years. Then he played for the Bills again in 2009, and then initially with the Bills in 2009, with the Miami Dolphins from 2010 to 2013, and then with the Bills again in 2015 through 2017. He made the Pro Bowl. Now that the Pro Bowl isn't the end-all be-all of barometer of success and productivity, but made the Pro Bowl in 2012 and then 2015 through 2017. Essentially, every year he was with the Bills the second time around, 2015 through 2017, and one of the later years with the Dolphins after all this stuff kind of came out. Now, if you've been paying attention to some of the stuff in the news, Incognito kind of was like arrested at a gym or was being just ridiculous. My thing is with him, he's a mess in terms of mentally. He's a guy, if you're a player and all of that, he's a guy you probably have in a locker room. You're like, this guy's hilarious. He's a total meatball. He plays well. He plays hard. Probably eats like meatball parm sandwiches for breakfast, like just a total guy that you're like, this guy was born to play football. However, he's a loose cannon. And he was not necessarily a loose cannon in Buffalo, but he was a loose cannon in Miami. He just proved himself when he wasn't playing football. He's a loose cannon. To me, Richie Incognito, talented guy, probably still has some talent, even though he's probably going to be – he's 34 years, currently going to be 35 after July 5th. To me, that's a guy that is your right guards get hurt, your tackle gets hurt, and that's a guy you bring in late in training camp, or you bring him in even if those guys aren't hurt, and you say, hey, it's a guy that's going to just compete for a spot, give him some money, see if he can do it, and if you feel like you're pretty close in terms of a playoff push, a lot of people don't think that, maybe you go that route, but for me, I think this is the deal, move in desperation, and go from there. Otherwise, I say maybe look elsewhere. Right, Scott?
Yeah, I would have to agree. I don't think it's a need.
It's okay if I'm not right. It's okay if you think I'm not right.
No, I agree. I mean, what I kind of said earlier, I don't think it's, I mean, unless they think this guy is going to step in and be, you know, so much better than anything they have. I mean, if you think he's a clear step up in talent over, you know, the 6 or 7 right guards you have, then you absolutely bring him in, because he is but if you think, no, he's older, he's a issue on the field, off the field, he's not worth it, he's not that great, then I'd say, no, you have enough right guards. You wait, you see what preseason, what OTAs bring, if everyone comes out healthy. If you have some guys get injured, you don't know, you know, what other teams are going to cut. Maybe someone else signs them and drops another guy you like better. So yeah, I'd say at this point, there's not a need, unless, you know, Frank Pollock looks at this roster and he's like, oh my gosh, you know, I can't do anything with this. And so yeah, at this point, I think it's too early to tell unless the new coaches think that we don't have anyone comparable to what this guy can bring. And then the question is, well, if he is that good, wouldn't someone have signed him by now? Which is kind of thing you hear, same with like Des Bryant. That's the whole thought of, hey, if Des Bryant's that good, someone's had to have signed him, right?
Well, I'm assuming it's a matter of risk versus reward and cost versus demand, you know, what they're demanding, all of that. I think that has to do with all of that. But you're right. You're right. And to me, I mean, I look at, and I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but I'm looking at some of the comments in the YouTube chat. I think it was, I can't remember who it was, but essentially, there are signs, especially with his recent arrest, of potential steroid abuse. And for those who know anything about steroids, there is a quote-unquote roid rage type of thing that happens with people who are on steroids. And based on, you know, I'm not accusing him of anything, but based on some of the details of the gym incident where he was arrested, there is some signs of some erratic behavior that could be attributed to that or other issues going on. And I don't know if you want to have a part of that. I think he could probably come in for a year and be a pretty good player for you. But I think that is at maximum what you want. A stopgap guy, a guy that, you know, that's it. And move on from there. I think obviously he's a big name. He's a successful name. He had a Pro Bowl year last year. Kind of surprisingly, in some ways, retired this year. And he might be Cincinnati, might be somewhere, but I don't. You know, I think the Bengals need to kind of filter out what they have at least through spring, maybe the early parts of summer, and then say, you know what, maybe we need another body here. Maybe we need a guy who can, you know, stabilize things, if you will, for a year and then move on from there. I don't know, but that's I think sounds like, Scott, you and I are on the same page. Let's get out of here, Scott. I want to get out of here. I don't, you know, final thoughts. We talked about, hey, final thoughts. I just want to get your thoughts on the FC Cincinnati being now an MLS team. And you know, you live in that area. I know that means a lot to that area. And I don't know if you're a fan of the other football, but any thoughts on that? And I think that kind of means a lot for the greater Cincinnati area, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, it's when I recall, I think the stadium is on the west side, so it's kind of a different venue than the other two major pro sports teams, which are downtown right there in the river. So it's kind of a different, I think they tried to get it down there. There was a lot of discussion over the last few months about stadiums and contract, you know, stadium deals. And obviously Hamilton County has had the history with the Paul Brown Stadium. That is something that many, I think, in Hamilton County have complained about, and even outsiders have looked at and said that was just a horrible deal. And so I think there was And it was very interesting because MLS did not want to give the FC Cincinnati a expansion franchise unless they got a new stadium. Well, no municipality wanted to give this, minor league soccer team a stadium or work with them on a stadium unless they were getting an MLS deal. So I believe the way it worked out was the soccer team was trying to work with different locations, inside like inner downtown kind of, or the riverfront or the West End, the East, and then what they ended up getting was this deal where, hey, we'll give you the stadium where they got it passed, where we guarantee we'll build this for you, assuming you get the expansion. And then once that got passed, the expansion, it seemed like it was something that was always kind of coming, or they were a strong contender. And I think one very interesting thing about that is you look at this team really hasn't been around all that long. For those who don't follow football, the kicking version of football, there's a tournament every year. I think it's called the Lamar Hunt Trophy or something of that sort, where they take MLS teams and any pro team, so teams of like lesser leagues, which is the one that the Cincinnati team was in, and they just throw them on this big tournament. Last year, FC Cincinnati made it really far in this tournament. They beat a couple of the MLS teams on the way to, I forget what it was, semifinals or somewhere pretty far. Out of like 64, whatever number of teams, they won quite a few games to get to this. And they drew huge crowds as far as Major League Soccer goes, even competing with Major League Soccer. And I think that was one of the things that MLS was able to see, like, wow, here's a team that draws fans. There seems to be an interest. They're winning games. They're winning prime clutch games they need to win. If they had lost the first game in that tournament, who knows? Maybe they would not have gotten this expansion bid. But it's interesting to see how there's a team in Cincinnati that has shown they're able to win in the postseason or in a tournament. Something I'd like to see from the other two Cincinnati teams.
Yeah. I think a lot of people would, but congratulations to the greater area of Cincinnati. They've been granted MLS status for FC Cincinnati in, short time. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of their PR guys, Jeff Burton, used to work for the Bengals, and now has been a spearheading figure for FC Cincinnati. And so good for them, good for the city of Cincinnati. I know hopefully FC Cincinnati doesn't provide the similar heartbreak that some of the other teams that this city is used to. But you can get this show on iTunes, SoundCloud, cincyjungle.com. You can also get it on YouTube, and you can get in touch with us via Twitter at Bengals OBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Scott, you have one more tidbit to talk about before we get out of here.
Yes, and I know it's kind of running long, so I'll make this very quick. But something you'd mentioned earlier in the show was The Office, Toby and Dwight talking about trains. So I went back and found that clip. I haven't listened to it yet, but in like the first half second, they show a train from like this very obscure angle. You can kind of see like a tiny bit of it.
Yeah.
And so I've been looking at this train, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. I can tell based on the paint scheme, it's a regional short line. And I can tell that, and it looks like it is because it's only one engine. It looks like it's pulling probably a covered hopper car, open hopper car, and then after that, I'm not quite sure because it kind of cuts off. If anyone can figure out what this is, because obviously they film it in California. I'm not very familiar with the California regional short lines. California is more Union Pacific, which is yellow. This thing's not yellow. It's not a BNSF or Santa Fe, which it kind of looks like at first, but it's not. If anyone knows what it is, feel free to tweet us. And maybe we'll mention you next time and on the air. Like, hey, this was, so-and-so was able to figure out by watching this half-second clip that is, it's obviously some sort of regional short line pulling at least one hopper car. But after that, that's all I can really tell on that tiny little angle. Like, obviously, when they were filming the show, they weren't focused on trying to let people see what this train was.
Please do. Let us know. And just to close up the show with the question of the night, and again, that is which Bengals logo do you like the best? On Twitter, at least, 28% says the leaping tiger, 32%, or excuse me, 33% says the tiger head, 28% says the bee, the striped bee, 11% says other or none. So that's where we're at on that. And you can let us know in the comments of our various media outlets about that. For the regional manager, Scott Schulze, I am the assistant to the regional manager, Anthony Cosenza. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. Be good to one another. There's a lot of negativity going around on a lot of different aspects, and we just be good to one another. A lot of negativity going around, and I don't know. I don't mean to be like peace, man, but that's kind of my take. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can get it on a number of different mediums, as we mentioned during the show. And we'll see you next episode. For Scott Schulze, I'm Anthony Cosenza. We'll see you next time. Thanks.